Justice is a flight that's often delayed, sometimes cancelled, but for one power-drunk gate agent, its arrival was swift, turbulent, and personally delivered by the most powerful man in the American sky. This isn't just a story about a ruined boarding pass. It's about the moment a quiet, unassuming neurosurgeon, a woman who held lives in her hands every day, had her dignity torn in half in front of 100 strangers. She thought her journey was over before it began, but she had no idea that the man sitting in the back of the lounge, the one quietly reading a newspaper, held the power to ground not just an employee, but an entire airline's reputation. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was thick with the usual cocktail of human emotion, frantic energy, weary resignation, and the low-grade hum of anxiety. For Dr. Alana Hayes, it was a familiar chaos she usually navigated with detached calm. As one of the country's leading pediatric neurosurgeons, she was accustomed to pressure. She could spend 12 straight hours in an operating room, her hands moving with microscopic precision to separate a tangled web of nerves in a child's brain, all while the steady beep of a heart monitor dictated the rhythm of life and death. A crowded airport was, by comparison, simple background noise. Today, however, a sliver of fatigue had pierced her professional armor. She was flying Global Wings Air Flight 88, a direct overnight route to Zurich. In 36 hours, she was scheduled to deliver the keynote address at the World Symposium of Neurological Advancement. It was the culmination of a decade of research into a groundbreaking surgical technique she had pioneered. Her name, Dr. Alana Hayes, was already respected, but this speech would cement her legacy. The weight of that expectation, coupled with a grueling week of back-to-back surgeries, had left her feeling drained. Alana was a woman whose appearance belied the fierce intellect and unwavering resolve within. She was tall and poised, with her hair styled in elegant, intricate locks that were pinned up to keep them off her collar. She wore a tailored blazer over a simple silk blouse and comfortable trousers, an outfit that spoke of professionalism without sacrificing the practicality needed for a long-haul flight. She was black, a fact that in her line of work was still unfortunately a novelty to some, but to her it was simply who she was. She had navigated the predominantly white male world of surgery with a grace and excellence that left no room for doubt. She believed, perhaps naively, that competence was a universal language. Her carry-on luggage was a testament to her meticulous nature. A sleek, hard-shell roller bag, well within the airline's specified dimensions, contained her essentials and a backup of her presentation. Her personal item was a leather satchel holding her laptop, her medical journals, and the worn paperback she hoped to read if she could quiet her mind enough to sleep on the plane. She had weighed them both at home. Everything was perfect. Everything was in order. As she approached Gate B-24, she saw the boarding process was already in a state of controlled frenzy. Families were trying to corral excited children. Business travelers were impatiently tapping on their phones, and a long queue for Zone 3 was already snaking its way from the podium. Presiding over this small kingdom was a gate agent who seemed to relish her authority. Her name tag read Carol. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a helmet of stiff blonde hair and a pursed lip expression that seemed permanently etched onto her face. She barked orders into the microphone with a grating nasal tone. Zone 3 only. Have your passports and boarding passes open to the photo page. If your bag does not fit in the sizer, it will be checked. No exceptions. Alana, holding a business class ticket, was in Zone 2. She stood off to the side, waiting for her group to be called, idly scrolling through an email from a grateful parent whose child she had operated on last month. A smile touched her lips. This was why she endured the long hours, the stress, the endless travel. This was what mattered. Zone 2, you may now board. Carol's voice crackled, breaking Alana from her reverie. Alana joined the much shorter line, her boarding pass and passport in hand. The man in front of her, a portly businessman with a roller bag visibly larger than hers and a bulging duffel bag slung over his shoulder, was waved through with a cursory glance. "Have a nice flight, sir," Carol chirped with a synthetic smile. Then it was Alana's turn. She stepped forward and handed over her documents. The smile on Carol's face vanished, replaced by a scrutinizing, suspicious glare. Her eyes flicked from Alana's face to her locks, down to her professional attire, and then settled on her luggage. "This bag looks too big," Carol stated flatly, her voice several decibels louder than it had been for the previous passenger. Alana maintained her polite, calm demeanor. "I can assure you it's standard carry-on size. I fly with it often." "All carry-on baggage must be placed in the sizer bin for verification," Carol said, gesturing with a pen towards the dreaded metal cage off to the side. It was a statement of policy, but her tone made it an accusation. A flicker of annoyance went through Alana. She had just seen a larger bag pass without a second look. Still arguing would only delay things. "Of course," she said, her voice even. She calmly rolled her bag over to the sizer and lifted it. It slid in perfectly with room to spare. She slid it back out. "There, you see," Alana said, turning back to the agent. "It fits." Carol's eyes narrowed. She seemed personally offended that the bag had complied. Her gaze then shifted to Alana's leather satchel. "That personal item is too large." This was patently absurd. The satchel was smaller than the backpacks and briefcases nearly every other passenger was carrying. "This is my laptop bag," Alana explained, her patience beginning to fray. "It fits comfortably under the seat, and it's well within the personal item allowance." "According to me," Carol said, emphasizing the word, with a venomous little smirk, "it's a second carry-on. You are permitted one carry-on and one small personal item like a purse. Not two suitcases. You'll have to consolidate them, or we'll have to check one." The line behind Alana was growing, and she could feel the impatient stares of other passengers. A flush of humiliation crept up her neck. She was being singled out, and it was becoming increasingly obvious. "That's not necessary." Alana said, her voice firm, but still respectful. "I've flown this airline dozens of times with this exact luggage combination and never had an issue. Perhaps you could look at the gentleman who just boarded. His bags were—" "I am not discussing other passengers with you," Carol snapped, her voice rising. "I am dealing with you. And your excess luggage. If you cannot follow the rules, you cannot board the plane. It's that simple." The word "you" was weaponized, loaded with an unspoken subtext that made Alana's stomach tighten. She knew this game. It was a subtle, insidious dance of power and prejudice. She had hoped at her level of professional achievement she might be spared. Clearly she was wrong. In this terminal, she wasn't Dr. Alana Hayes, keynote speaker. She was just a black woman being told she didn't belong. Alana took a deep, steadying breath, the kind she took before making the first incision. Panic and anger were luxuries she couldn't afford. "Okay," she said, forcing a placating tone. "Let's be reasonable. There is no need to check the bag. If you insist, I can open my roller bag and place my satchel inside it. It will be a tight fit, but it will work. Would that satisfy the requirement?" She was offering a solution, a concession designed to de-escalate the situation and appease the agent. It was a performance of compliance she resented having to give, but her priority was getting to Zurich. Carol seemed momentarily thrown off by Alana's composure. She had clearly expected an argument, a raised voice, something that would justify her hostility. Alana's calm, logical approach seemed to infuriate her even more. "No," Carol said, her lips thinning into a bloodless line. "That's not the procedure. Once an item has been identified as excess, it must be checked. There's a $75 fee." The fee? There it was. The punitive sting in the tail. It wasn't about the rules anymore. It was about humiliation and control. "That's unacceptable," Alana stated, her voice losing its gentle edge and gaining a core of steel. "You saw my primary bag fit in the sizer. You are claiming my laptop bag is a second carry-on, which is contrary to your own airline's policy, a policy I have read. I am not paying to check a bag that is compliant." Behind her, a man in a rumpled suit muttered, "For God's sake, just let her on the plane." Another passenger shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable. No one stepped forward, but the air was now thick with tension. Carol's face flushed a blotchy red. She leaned forward, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial, menacing whisper. "You're causing a disturbance, ma'am. You're holding up the boarding process. People like you always think the rules don't apply to them. You come here with your fancy clothes and your attitude thinking you can do whatever you want." The thinly veiled racism was now laid bare. "People like you." The phrase hung in the air, acrid and ugly. Every ounce of Alana's professionalism was now focused on not reacting, on not giving this woman the satisfaction of seeing her break. "The only person causing a disturbance is you," Alana replied, her voice dangerously quiet. "You are applying a policy incorrectly and selectively. I've asked for a reasonable solution, and you have refused. I would like to speak to your supervisor." This was the ultimate challenge to Carol's authority, and it was a gamble. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it made things infinitely worse. For Carol, it was like a lit match thrown on gasoline. "You want my supervisor?" She scoffed, a wild, triumphant look in her eyes. "I am the lead gate agent. The final authority here is me. David won't tell you any different." She tapped her name badge. "Carol Miller. I've been doing this job for 25 years. I know the rules better than you do." She snatched Alana's boarding pass and passport from the counter. Her knuckles were white as she gripped them. "You know what, I've had enough of your attitude." The world seemed to slow down for Alana. She watched, as if from a great distance, as Carol Miller took the boarding pass, the single document that represented her journey, her speech, her entire reason for being in this airport, and held it up between her thumb and forefinger. "You are not boarding this flight," Carol declared, her voice ringing with finality. And then, with a single sharp, deliberate motion, she ripped the boarding pass in two. The sound was small, a soft zrrrip, but in the sudden shocked silence of the gate area, it sounded like a gunshot. The two halves of the paper fluttered onto the counter. The torn pieces lay there stark white against the gray laminate. Flight 88, Seat 4A, Dr. Alana Hayes. Her name bisected, her journey voided. For a moment, no one moved. The other passengers stared, their mouths agape. A child, sensing the raw adult hostility, began to cry. Alana looked down at the ruined pieces of her pass, then back up at Carol's smug, defiant face. A cold, profound wave of disbelief washed over her, followed by a surge of pure, undiluted rage. But on the surface, she remained preternaturally still. The surgeon's calm. She felt the blood pounding in her ears. Everything she had worked for, the years of study, the sleepless nights, the immense pressure of her career, all of it seemed to culminate in this single degrading moment of arbitrary power wielded by a woman in a polyester uniform. "You have no right," Alana whispered, her voice shaking with a fury she could no longer contain. "I have every right," Carol shot back, her chest puffed out. "You are a security risk. You're belligerent. We will not have you on our aircraft. Now step aside. You're holding up my line." She gestured dismissively, as if swatting away a fly. But Alana didn't move. She was rooted to the spot, the injustice of it all threatening to suffocate her. Her trip was ruined. Her keynote speech, which colleagues from around the world were flying in to hear, would not be delivered. Her reputation for meticulous reliability was about to be shattered. All because of the petty bigotry of one woman. It was in this moment of utter helplessness, of profound and public humiliation, that the first twist of fate began to turn. Unseen by Carol, a man who had been sitting in the cordoned-off first-class lounge area, his view partially obscured by a decorative pillar, had stood up. He had been observing the entire interaction with a growing sense of disbelief and anger. He was a man in his early 60s, dressed in a simple, well-tailored but unremarkable charcoal suit. He had gray hair and a quiet, unassuming demeanor. He looked like any other traveling executive. He placed his newspaper neatly on his seat, picked up his briefcase, and began walking towards the gate, his expression hardening with every step. As the man approached the podium, his steps were measured and silent, drawing no attention at first. All eyes were still on the tableau of conflict, Carol Miller flush with victory, Dr. Alana Hayes rigid with shock and fury, and the torn boarding pass lying between them like a declaration of war. "Excuse me," the man said. His voice was not loud, but it possessed a peculiar quality of resonance that cut through the murmuring of the crowd. It was a voice accustomed to being listened to. Carol spun around her face, a mask of irritation. "The line is back there, sir. We will get to you." The man didn't move. He simply looked at her, his gaze level and unnervingly direct. "I'm not here to board. I'm here to understand what just happened." He gestured towards the counter. "Did you just tear up a passenger's boarding pass?" "This is an airline security matter, sir. It does not concern you," Carol said dismissively, attempting to wave him away. "Now, if you'll please. Everything that happens at a gate in a United States airport concerns me." The man interrupted, his voice dropping a fraction yet gaining an immense weight of authority. He looked past Carol to Alana, his eyes filled with a calm professional concern. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Alana, pulled from her state of shock by the stranger's intervention, simply nodded, unable to trust her voice. Carol, however, was incensed by the man's audacity. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step away, or I will be calling airport security." It was her go-to threat, one that usually sent meddlesome passengers scurrying. The man didn't even blink. He simply reached into his jacket, pulled out a slim leather wallet, and flipped it open. He didn't flash it dramatically. He presented it to her calmly, holding it steady for her to read. "I don't think that will be necessary," he said. "Robert Maxwell, acting administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration. And you are—" The name, coupled with the official gold seal in the wallet, hit Carol Miller like a physical blow. The color drained from her face, leaving a pasty grayish pallor. Her smug confidence evaporated in an instant, replaced by a raw, uncomprehending terror. The FAA, the supreme authority in American aviation. It was like a local traffic cop pulling over a car only to find the director of the FBI behind the wheel. Her mouth opened and closed silently like a fish, gasping for air. Her eyes darted from the ID back to the man's impassive face. I, she stammered. Robert Maxwell slowly closed his wallet and returned it to his pocket. His calm demeanor was gone, replaced by a glacial fury that was far more terrifying than any shouting could ever be. "I asked you a question, Ms. Miller," he said, reading her name tag with pointed slowness. "Did you, an agent of Global Wings Air, just deny boarding to a ticketed passenger and destroy her travel document in front of me?" The entire gate area was now dead silent. Everyone was watching, realizing they were witnessing something far more significant than a simple dispute over luggage. "Well, her luggage was oversized." Carol stammered, her voice a pathetic squeak. "And her personal item, she was belligerent." "I was not," Alana said, finally finding her voice. It was cold and clear as ice. "I was compliant. I demonstrated that my bag fit the sizer. I offered to consolidate my luggage. Your agent refused all reasonable solutions and chose to escalate the situation." Maxwell's gaze remained fixed on Carol. "I've been sitting over there for the last 10 minutes, Ms. Miller. I heard the entire exchange. I heard Dr. Hayes." He glanced at Alana's luggage tag, noting the doctor with a flicker of respect. "Offer you a perfectly logical solution. I heard you refuse it. Fuse. I heard you levy a punitive and unnecessary baggage fee. And then I heard you use the phrase, 'people like you.' And that Ms. Miller is where this stopped being a customer service issue and became a federal matter." He turned to the other gate agent, a young man who had been watching the entire scene with wide, horrified eyes. "Son, what's your name?" Mark, sir," the young man stammered. "Mark, I want you to call your station manager and tell him to get to this gate immediately. Tell him Robert Maxwell of the FAA requires his presence. Then I want you to issue Dr. Hayes a new boarding pass for seat 1A in first class. Comp the ticket. All of it. And you will do it now." "Yes, sir." Mark practically leaped to his keyboard, his fingers flying across the keys as if his life depended on it. Carol stood frozen, her face a crumpled mask of disbelief. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. This was her gate, her kingdom. "You can't do that." She whispered the words, devoid of any conviction. Maxwell turned his head slowly to face her. His voice was now lethally soft. "I can assure you, Ms. Miller, I can. I am on my way to the same International Aviation Summit in Zurich as Dr. Hayes. I was flying incognito to get a sense of the real passenger experience. And you have just given me a more potent keynote speech than I ever could have written myself. You have become a walking, talking exhibit of everything that is wrong with this industry." He took a step closer, and Carol flinched. "You did not just inconvenience a passenger. You abused your authority. You engaged in what appears to be a clear case of discriminatory behavior. And you did it all while wearing the uniform of an airline licensed to operate by the very administration I lead. You are not just a problem for Global Wings Air. You are now a problem for me. And I take my problems very, very seriously." The click-clack of Mark's keyboard was the only sound for a moment. Then the printer whirred to life, spitting out a fresh boarding pass. He carefully handed it to Alana, avoiding looking at Carol. "Here you go, Dr. Hayes. Seat 1A. My sincerest apologies for this." Alana took the boarding pass, her hands trembling slightly. She looked from the new pass to the torn pieces of the old one still on the counter. Then she looked at Robert Maxwell, the unassuming man in the charcoal suit who had descended like an avenging angel. "Thank you," she said the words, feeling wholly inadequate. "The thanks I need, Doctor," Maxwell replied, his eyes still locked on Carol, "is for you to get on that plane and deliver the speech you were meant to give. Allow us to handle the rest." Just then, a harried-looking man in a slightly better-fitting suit came running down the jet bridge, his face pale and beaded with sweat. "I'm David Chen, the station manager. I was told, Mr. Maxwell." Maxwell nodded curtly. "Mr. Chen, we have a great deal to discuss. But first, your lead agent, Ms. Miller, will be surrendering her airport security credentials and her employee ID to me. Her employment here is over effective immediately, and that I promise you is only the beginning." David Chen looked as though he had just been submerged in ice water. The station manager was a man accustomed to dealing with irate passengers and logistical nightmares, but nothing in his corporate training manual had prepared him for the sight of the head of the FAA standing at one of his gates calmly and methodically dismantling his lead agent's career. "Mr. Maxwell, sir, perhaps we can discuss this in my office," David said, trying to regain a semblance of control and move the spectacle away from the still gaping passengers. "No," Maxwell said, his voice unwavering. "We will discuss it here. This happened in public, and the immediate consequences will be public. Ms. Miller, your ID. Now." Carol Miller stared at him, her mind finally catching up to the catastrophic reality of her situation. 25 years. A pension she was just a few years away from collecting. A position of authority she had lorded over thousands of travelers. All of it was turning to smoke. With trembling fingers, she unclipped the plastic ID from her lanyard. It bore her smiling photo, a picture taken a decade ago when her expression wasn't so permanently soured. She held it out. Maxwell took it without touching her hand, holding it by the edges, as if it were contaminated evidence. "Mr. Chen," Maxwell continued, pocketing the ID. "You are her direct supervisor, are you not?" "Yes, sir, I am." "Then I have some questions for you. Is it standard procedure for Global Wings air agents to tear up a passenger's boarding pass?" "No, absolutely not, sir. It's a gross violation of..." "Is it standard procedure to ignore your own baggage sizing policy for one passenger and then enforce a fictional version of it on another?" "No, sir, of course not." "Then tell me, Mr. Chen, how does an employee like Carol Miller, who demonstrates such a flagrant disregard for policy and basic human decency, remain in a customer-facing leadership role for, as she so proudly stated, 25 years? This behavior tonight felt practiced. This wasn't her first time on this particular power trip, was it? David Chen's face went from pale to ghostly white. He knew the answer. Of course he knew. Carol Miller's personnel file was thick with complaints. They were often vaguely worded, rude, unhelpful, aggressive, and always came down to the passenger's word against hers. The airline's HR department, notoriously risk-averse, had always coached managers like David to de-escalate and document, which was corporate speak for make the problem go away and create a paper trail that protects the company. Carol was a known issue, a problem employee, but she was also unionized and just a few years from retirement. It had been easier to manage the complaints than to initiate a messy termination process. Until now. We have a system for passenger complaints, sir," David stammered weakly. "All issues are investigated." "Investigated." Maxwell repeated the word, his tone dripping with skepticism. "I want Carol Miller's complete personnel file, including every single customer complaint on my desk, by 9:00 a.m. tomorrow. Not a redacted corporate summary. The entire unvarnished file. I am initiating a formal FAA inquiry into the training oversight and complaint resolution protocols at Global Wings Air, starting with this station. I suspect what I'll find is a systemic failure to address problematic behavior, which has allowed a culture of hostility to fester, and that Mr. Chen costs airlines more than just fines. It costs them their operating certificates. The threat, though veiled, was monumental. He was talking about the airline's very right to fly. Meanwhile, Alana watched this unfold, a strange sense of detachment settling over her. She was no longer a victim in this scenario. She was a witness. She saw Carol's face crumble, the vicious smirk replaced by a slack-jawed, tear-streaked mask of despair. The woman who had tried to break her was now utterly broken herself. There was no triumph in it, only a profound and hollow sadness. Maxwell turned back to her. His demeanor softened instantly. "Dr. Hayes, the pre-boarding announcement for first class is about to begin. Please allow me to escort you onto the plane." He gently took her roller bag handle and turned towards the jet bridge. It was a gesture of service, of restitution. The FAA administrator was acting as her skycap. The remaining passengers in the line parted like the Red Sea, their faces a mixture of awe and relief. As she walked past the podium, Alana made eye contact with Carol one last time. In that gaze, she saw not a monster, but a pathetic, bitter woman whose small power was the only thing she had, and who had just lost it all. Carol looked away, shame and ruin radiating from her. Stepping onto the plane, Alana was greeted by a flight attendant who had clearly been briefed. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Hayes. We are so deeply sorry for your experience at the gate. Please let me show you to your seat. Can I get you a glass of champagne, some water?" "Water would be lovely, thank you," Alana said, her voice still a bit shaky. Seat 1A was a spacious pod, with its own privacy screen, a plush seat that converted into a fully flat bed and more legroom than she knew what to do with. She sank into the soft leather, the surreal nature of the past 20 minutes washing over her. She had gone from being publicly humiliated and denied travel to being personally escorted onto the plane by the head of the FAA and placed in the most exclusive seat. A few moments later, Robert Maxwell appeared at the entrance of her pod. "I trust this is more comfortable." "Mr. Maxwell, I don't know how to thank you," she said earnestly. "By not letting this incident deter you. People like Carol Miller count on their victims to be silenced, to be too tired or intimidated to fight back. You held your ground with dignity. What I did was simply enforce the standards that she was paid to uphold. Enjoy your flight, Doctor. I'm in 2B if you need anything at all. I look forward to reading about the success of your speech." He gave a small, respectful nod and retreated to his own seat. As the cabin door was sealed with a heavy thud, Alana finally allowed herself to exhale. She looked out the small window as the massive aircraft pushed back from the gate. Down below, she could just make out the figure of Carol Miller being escorted by David Chen and an airport security officer away from the gate, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She was grounded. Permanently. The plane began its powerful taxi toward the runway, and Alana Hayes, against all odds, was on her way to Zurich. The Karma, however, was just beginning its own journey. The email landed in the inbox of Amelia Vance, the Senior Vice President of In-Flight Services for Global Wings Air, at 6:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The subject line was chillingly understated, "Official Inquiry, Incident at JFK Gate B-24, Flight 88. The sender was Robert Maxwell, FAA. Amelia, a corporate veteran who had seen everything from engine failures to onboard food poisoning scandals, felt a jolt of pure dread. An official inquiry from the administrator's office was not a slap on the wrist. It was a formal siege. She read the attached preliminary report, her perfectly manicured hands clenching into fists. It detailed the event with the detached, precise language of a legal document, yet the narrative was damning. It spoke of selective policy enforcement, unprofessional and hostile conduct, discriminatory language, and unlawful destruction of a travel document. It concluded with a formal request for a staggering amount of documentation, Carol Miller's complete, unredacted 25-year employment history. All passenger complaints filed against her. All complaints filed against any JFK gate agent in the last 5 years. Training manuals for customer-facing staff, and detailed procedures for complaint resolution and disciplinary action. The deadline was 48 hours. The phone calls started immediately. Amelia called the airline's CEO, Michael Corrigan. Corrigan, who was on a golf course in Scottsdale, swore so loudly his caddy flinched. He called the head of the legal department, who started talking about liability exposure in the tens of millions. The news ricocheted through the executive wing of Global Wings Air headquarters in Atlanta. The incident at Gate B-24 was no longer about one rogue employee. It was an existential threat to the company's reputation and potentially its bottom line. Meanwhile, David Chen at JFK was having the worst day of his career. He had spent the entire night in his office personally combing through Carol's file with a representative from HR. What he found was a portrait of a disaster that had been allowed to happen. Complaint after complaint told the same story. 2014. Agent was hostile and rude about my daughter's stroller. 2016. Agent singled me out to weigh my carry-on, ignored others with larger bags. 2018. Ms. Miller spoke to my elderly father in a demeaning and aggressive tone. Chapter 2021. The agent at the gate seemed to be targeting minority passengers for extra screening of their bags. Each complaint had been resolved. The resolution was almost always the same: a form letter apology sent to the passenger with a $100 flight voucher and a note in Carol's file stating, "Coached on customer service excellence. Employee reminded of GWA's commitment to professionalism." It was a meaningless, repetitive cycle of corporate ass covering. There had been no real consequences, no mandatory retraining, no suspension. David realized with a sinking heart that Robert Maxwell had been exactly right. This was a systemic failure. His own signature was on half of those resolution forms. The first head to roll after Carol's was David Chen's. He was suspended indefinitely pending the outcome of the FAA investigation. His boss, the director of Northeast Operations, was next. The message from the CEO was clear: find the break in the chain of command and cauterize the wound before the infection spread to the executive suite. The investigation itself was swift and brutal. An FAA team descended on JFK, interviewing other gate agents, baggage handlers, and supervisors. The story that emerged was of a woman who had grown bitter and resentful over the years, who felt the company owed her and the passengers were an inconvenience. They discovered she frequently bragged about her authority and her ability to put people in their place. They also uncovered a disturbing pattern. An outsized percentage of the complaints against her were from women and people of color. For Carol Miller, the real-world consequences were catastrophic. Being fired was just the start. The FAA, as part of its inquiry, formally revoked her air operations area credentials on a permanent basis. This meant she could never work in a secure area of any U.S. airport again. Her 25 years of experience were now worthless. Her union, after reviewing the FAA's preliminary findings and the mountain of evidence in her file, informed her that while they would ensure she received her contractually obligated severance, they would not fight the termination. It was indefensible. She tried to find other work. A job as a receptionist was a possibility until the background check revealed a termination for cause from a major corporation. A retail position fell through when the manager Googled her name and found the first whispers of the story leaking onto aviation blogs. She was becoming unemployable. The power she had wielded so carelessly had vanished, leaving a void filled with debt and despair. Her husband, a retired bus driver, couldn't understand the severity of it. "It was just a boarding pass, for crying out loud," he'd say. But it wasn't. It was the final straw on a camel's back that happened to be owned by the most powerful man in aviation. The hard karma was this Carol Miller, who had judged and dismissed thousands of people based on a momentary glance, was now being judged and dismissed everywhere she went. The woman who controlled the gate to the rest of the world now found herself locked out. While Carol Miller's personal world was imploding, Dr. Alana Hayes was excelling. She arrived in Zurich feeling exhausted, but vindicated. She took a few hours to rest at her hotel, the Grand Dolder Grand, overlooking the lake, and then reviewed her notes for the symposium. The incident at JFK had shaken her, but it had also ignited a new fire within her. The next day, she stepped onto the stage in a hall filled with over 1,000 of the world's brightest medical minds. She began her keynote as planned, detailing her innovative techniques in pediatric neurosurgery, with slides showing complex brain scans and surgical pathways. Her presentation was brilliant, clear, and compelling. The audience was rapt, but as she neared her conclusion, she paused. She looked up from her notes, her gaze sweeping across the sea of faces. "The work we do," she began, her voice resonating with a new personal conviction, "is built on a foundation of trust and precision. We demand it of ourselves, of our instruments, of our teams. We cannot afford a single moment of carelessness, a single act of bias. Because in our world the consequences are immediate and profound. A misplaced hand, a moment of poor judgment can change a life forever." She let that sink in. "I was reminded of this just yesterday, not in an operating theater, but in an airport terminal. I was reminded that bias and the abuse of small authority are not abstract concepts. They are real. They are tangible. And they can be just as damaging to the human spirit as a physical ailment is to the body. Professionalism is not a coat we wear only at work. It is a principle we must carry within us. In the hospital, in the community, and yes, even in a boarding line at the airport. Our duty of care extends beyond the surgical suite. It's in how we treat every single person we encounter." She hadn't planned to say it, but the words flowed out authentic and powerful. The speech concluded to a thunderous, sustained standing ovation. Colleagues rushed to congratulate her, not just on her surgical breakthroughs, but on her poignant closing message. The story, without names or specifics, began to circulate. Back in the United States, the fallout for Global Wings Air was intensifying. The FAA's preliminary findings were leaked to the press, likely by a savvy PR move from Maxwell's office to apply maximum pressure. The story, "Gate Agent Rips Up Surgeon's Pass, FAA Chief Steps In," went viral. The airline's stock took a 4% dip overnight. The board was in an uproar. CEO Michael Corrigan was forced to do something he loathed, issue a full public and deeply humble apology. He appeared on national television, his face a mask of corporate contrition. "What Dr. Alana Hayes experienced is antithetical to everything Global Wings Air stands for," he said, looking directly into the camera. "It was an indefensible failure on multiple levels of our organization. A failure of a single employee, a failure of local management, and frankly, a failure of corporate oversight, for which I take full responsibility." He then announced a series of sweeping changes. A complete overhaul of customer service training with a new curriculum focused on de-escalation and implicit bias to be designed by a third-party consulting firm. a new zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior, and most significantly, the creation of a new empowered passenger advocacy office to which customers could appeal disputes with gate agents in real time with the power to overrule on-the-spot decisions. He also announced a multi-million-dollar donation to a scholarship fund that supported minority students pursuing careers in aviation. It was a classic, expensive corporate damage control maneuver, but thanks to the FAA's continued scrutiny, it had teeth. Robert Maxwell made it clear in a private call to Corrigan that he would be watching and that this new advocacy office had better be more than just good PR. A week after she returned to the U.S., Alana received a personal letter from Michael Corrigan, along with a check for a significant sum, which he suggested she donate to a charity of her choice. He offered her 10 international first-class round-trip tickets, valid for life. She accepted the apology, donated the money to Doctors Without Borders, and filed the tickets away. She also received a personal email from Robert Maxwell. Subject: Zurich. Dear Dr. Hayes, I'm told your keynote was the talk of the symposium. Congratulations. Your work is inspiring. On our end, the inquiry is proceeding. Global Wings Air is proving cooperative. The changes they are implementing will be monitored closely. Your unfortunate experience has become a catalyst for a much-needed industry-wide conversation. It is now being used as a case study in FAA-mandated training for all major U.S. carriers. What happened to you will not be forgotten, and hopefully it will not be repeated. Fly safe. Sincerely, Robert Maxwell, FAA. Alana read the email and felt a sense of profound closure. The karma hadn't just hit back at one person. It had sent a seismic shockwave through an entire industry. Her humiliation had been transformed into a lesson, a catalyst for change that would hopefully make the skies a little friendlier for everyone. 6 months later, the crisp autumn air of New York City did little to cool the relentless pace of Dr. Alana Hayes' life. The incident at JFK had settled within her not as a constantly aching wound, but as a layer of reinforced steel around her spirit. It had changed her in ways subtle and profound. The world saw the same brilliant neurosurgeon, but her colleagues noticed a new unwavering edge to her advocacy. This became clear during a tense surgical review meeting. A promising young resident, Dr. Ramirez, was presenting a complex case. He was faltering under the aggressive questioning of a senior attending, Dr. Croft, a man known for his sharp intellect and even sharper tongue. Croft dismissed the resident's proposed surgical approach as timid and textbook. The younger doctor, intimidated, began to stammer and lose his confidence. The Alana from a year ago might have let it play out, perhaps offering a quiet word of encouragement to Ramirez later. But the woman who had been publicly stripped of her dignity for the crime of carrying a laptop was no longer a passive observer of power dynamics. Actually, Dr. Croft, Alana interjected, her voice cutting calmly through the tension. Dr. Ramirez's approach isn't timid, it's prudent. Given the patient's vascular anomalies, your more aggressive resection carries a significantly higher risk of a catastrophic bleed. The textbook exists for a reason. It's the foundation upon which we build, not a monument we ignore for the sake of ego. The room went silent. Dr. Croft, stunned at being so directly and publicly challenged, stared at her. Alana met his gaze without flinching, her expression unassailable. She then turned to Ramirez. Your reasoning is sound, Doctor. Proceed with your presentation. She had not raised her voice yet. She had completely shifted the power in the room, defending the junior doctor and elevating the standard of patient care over professional arrogance. This was her new normal, a quiet, unshakable refusal to let petty tyranny in any form go unchecked. Later that month, another conference beckoned, this one in Chicago. As she booked her flight, the Global Wings Air logo appeared on her screen. She hesitated for only a moment. Her friends thought she was crazy for even considering them. "They don't deserve your money," her sister had insisted. But for Alana, it wasn't about them. It was about her. Refusing to fly with them felt like a concession, an admission that she was still afraid that the memory of Carol Miller still held power over her choices. She would not allow that. She booked the ticket. Returning to Terminal 4 at JFK was a surreal experience. The ghost of her previous ordeal lingered in the air, but the reality was jarringly different. The first thing she noticed was the signage. Everywhere there were new, brightly colored placards. "Welcome to a new Global Wings experience," one read. Another posted prominently at every gate was the Passenger Bill of Rights, with a large QR code leading to the new Passenger Advocacy Office. The atmosphere itself felt lighter. The gate agents, a noticeably more diverse group than she remembered, were smiling. The controlled chaos of the terminal now seemed more like a choreographed dance than a frantic scramble. When she arrived at her gate, the agent, a young woman with a warm smile, scanned her pass. "It's a pleasure to have you with us today, Dr. Hayes," the agent said, her eyes briefly meeting Alana's with a flicker of recognition. Alana realized her name was likely legendary in their internal training modules. "We'll be starting our pre-boarding for business class in just a few minutes." There was no scrutiny of her luggage, no challenging tone. There was only respect. As she sat in the waiting area, Alana saw a passenger with an oversized bag being pulled aside. She tensed instinctively, but the exchange was entirely different. The agent was polite, apologetic even. "Sir, I'm so sorry, but this bag is a little too large for the overheads. Let's get that checked for you, no charge of course, to make sure you have a comfortable flight." The situation was handled with grace, not aggression. It was a different airline. Thousands of miles away in the sterile fluorescent glare of a Phoenix superstore. Carol Miller's world had shrunk to the size of aisle 12. Her final destination was the graveyard shift stocking breakfast cereals and canned fruit from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The physical work was grueling, a constant ache in her back and knees that her 25 years behind a desk had not prepared her for. But the emotional toll was worse. She who had once held the power to grant or deny access to the entire globe was now invisible. The shoppers who passed her in the dead of night looked through her. Her manager was a kid named Kyle, barely 25, who spoke to her with the weary condescension one reserves for a difficult piece of machinery. One night he cornered her by the pallet of canned peaches. "Carol, we've got a problem," he said, holding up his tablet. "Inventory shows you scanned in 6 cases of diced peaches, but there are only 5 on the shelf. That's a discrepancy. We have to be precise here." The word precise struck a nerve. The injustice of it being chastised for a can of peaches after a lifetime of managing flights worth millions was a bitter pill. The old Carol would have eviscerated him with a sharp, condescending retort. She would have belittled his authority and questioned his intelligence. But the old Carol was gone. That power had vanished. "I'm sorry, Kyle," she mumbled, staring at the scuffed linoleum floor. "I must have miscounted. I'll double-check it." "You do that," he said, tapping his screen and walking away already onto the next minor crisis. In that moment, Carol felt the full crushing weight of her karmic debt. She had been the arbiter of rules, and now she lived in terror of breaking the most trivial ones. During her 3 a.m. break, she sat in the desolate employee lounge. A small television mounted in the corner was playing a 24-hour news channel. A business segment came on, featuring an interview with Michael Corrigan, the CEO of Global Wings Air. He was beaming, touting the company's turnaround. "We've posted our highest customer satisfaction scores in a decade," he said proudly. "It all came from a moment of reckoning. We had an unfortunate gate incident last year that forced us to look in the mirror. We overhauled our training from the ground up, empowered our people to be problem solvers, not just rule enforcers, and the results speak for themselves." Carol watched her stale coffee growing cold in her hands. An unfortunate gate incident. She hadn't even been given the dignity of a name in the narrative of the company she gave a quarter-century to. She was a footnote, a nameless, faceless catalyst for the very success she was now excluded from. She had wanted to be seen to be powerful, and her actions had ultimately rendered her invisible. As her plane began its smooth descent into Chicago, Dr. Alana Hayes looked out the window at the sprawling city lights. She wasn't thinking of Carol Miller or Robert Maxwell. She was thinking about the patient whose case she was there to consult, on a young boy with a tumor wrapped around his brainstem. Her focus, as always, was on the journey ahead. The gate at JFK had been a single turbulent moment, but she had cleared it. Her world continued to expand, filled with purpose, and the profound responsibility of holding lives in her hands. For Carol, there were no more journeys. Her world had contracted to the four corners of a stockroom, her purpose reduced to the Sisyphean task of filling shelves that would just be emptied again. The ultimate karma was not merely punishment, but a perfect, crushing inversion of fates. One woman whose journey had been unjustly halted now flew freely, her importance to the world affirmed. The other, the gatekeeper, was now locked in a life of quiet irrelevance, the ghost of a person who once stood at the crossroads of the world and chose the wrong path. That single tearing sound of a boarding pass was an act of hatred, an abuse of power designed to humiliate and erase one person's journey. But it failed. Instead, it became an echo that brought down a toxic career, shook $1 billion corporation to its core, and triggered real, lasting change across an entire industry. This story is a powerful reminder that the person you underestimate today could be the one who changes your world tomorrow. It proves that even in the face of blatant injustice, dignity and professionalism can be the most powerful weapons. The sky is big enough for everyone, but there's no room for prejudice at 30,000 feet. If this story of justice and accountability resonated with you, and if you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with respect, please hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with others, so this important message can travel even further. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true stories, where karma isn't just a concept, but a final destination. Thank you for listening.